and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Ann Kademian, Executive Director at USG. At a time when higher education is contemplating innovation on a major scale, we can look to the cutting-edge examples of higher education innovators and institutions for guidance and insight and direction. Our guest today was a leader in 2 of the most innovative higher ed institutions in the country. He was former president at Southern New Hampshire University Global Campus and a senior level academic and administrative leader at Western Governors University. Dr. Greg Fowler is now the president of the University of Maryland Global Campus. He is a 2-time Fulbright Senior Scholar and a member of the Power 30 in higher education, and a fantastic partner to the universities at Shady Grove. Please join me in welcoming Greg Fowler to This is USG. Dr. Fowler, welcome.
Thank you, Ann. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Absolutely.
So happy to have this chance to talk with you. You're doing so many innovative things at UMGC. And of course, we are at a time where higher education is looking to do more innovative things to address so many challenges. But before we head into that part of the conversation, I'd like you to share a little bit about your story. You know, you've been a Fulbright scholar, you have an MBA, you've worked in higher education institutions that were doing creative and innovative things long before we associated those words with higher education institutions. So could you tell us a little bit about your own journey? What brought you to higher education? What brought you into these institutions that were driving really interesting and innovative change? What brought you to UMGC?
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, sometimes when I look back over my career, I think about, it's funny when I look at my CV and you look at your LinkedIn profile, you always go, what do I want to put on here? What do I not want to put on here? For a long time, I took off of during I was in college, I actually worked at Six Flags over Georgia. As you move up your career, you go, nobody really cares about that. But the more I dove back into a lot of the things that apply now, a lot of those things I learned during even my college years at Six Flags over Georgia. And it was really about user experience and how to anticipate what people need and how to respond to that, and how people will, even after you think you've designed a user-friendly experience, they will do something else. And how do you take that feedback and continue to iterate upon it is something I learned a lot about there, as well as how to work in a team. So one of the things we used to say at Six Flags was, you know, like any place of that type, it has different departments, rides and grounds and food service and shows. And it has a sort of little hierarchy, you know, the rides people are sort of on the top, and even within the rides, if you're on the new roller coaster, you're higher than if you're on the carousel, those types of things. But one of the things that we learned about team building was that it doesn't really matter where you are or who you are working with within the park. Everybody's job is to pull together to make the experience right for the guests who are in the park. So it may not be true that you're not in, it may be true that you're not in grounds, but if you're walking through the park and see a piece of trash on the ground, pick it up and put it in the trash can, because you're part of the team that's supposed to be enhancing that experience. And that's really served me well over a period of time, as we've designed a lot of different types of learning experiences. And from there, after I graduated from college, I went on, and my first job was at the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is here in the Washington, D.C. area. And my first job there was as an outreach specialist. And my work was really around how do you get underserved or underrepresented populations to be able to share in the grants and other things that the agency was doing, and make sure that their story becomes part of the larger American narrative. So spent a lot of time working with various populations, inner city, rural areas, certainly African-American, Hispanic, tribal colleges, and those, and saying, how do we help make sure that you're able to, you know, participate in this work that the federal government's doing? And did that work for a number of years until I went off and became a professor at one of the Penn State campuses, and eventually got my first Fulbright and went over to Europe. And when I was in Europe, it was during that period of time when a lot of these countries were trying to figure out, how do you create an educational system that operates with various standards in different countries, and at the same time allows you to move back and forth through the European Union with something that's similar to what we consider a bachelor's degree here in the States. And on one hand, they wanted to figure out how do you create common standards, but on the other hand, how do you continue to maintain the different flavors of education that make them different? And thought a lot about that. And when I came back to the States, I really wanted to spend a lot of time thinking about how do you think about what is valuable in education, and what are the skill sets that regardless of where you go, you want to make sure you have. And got invited at that point to participate in an up and coming institution named Western Governors, which was built by two governors, Roy Romer from Colorado, Mike Levitt from Utah, who were having some challenges from their local populations. And a lot of the businesses were saying, you're graduating students who can't do what you say they can do. And we need you to come up with a different model. And that's where competency-based education came into play, which is less about seat time and more about how do we assess students and make sure they have the skills they're going to need to be successful in various industries. And at the time, it was a very small organization. I think it had about 500 graduates, 3,000 students. And I came on as Dean of Liberal Arts and over also their orientation and alumni services and a number of other programs, and eventually became the associate provost there. And by the time I left, they had about 35,000 students. And of course, they're much larger than that now, and went off and eventually ended up at Southern New Hampshire University, which was doing a similar type of growth and wanted to make sure that they could, in their online experiences, mirror what they were doing in their ground campus, which had been around since the 1930s. And in doing so, my job was to make sure that when people looked under the hood or kicked the tires, that we could say, nope, this is still a high quality experience, one that still has that can mirror the outcomes of the psychology program that's on campus are going to be mirrored in the things that we're going to be doing in the virtual experience as well. And of course, about 3 years ago, I was blessed to take on this job here at University of Maryland Global Campus. And everybody always talks about, well, you've done the online thing. And I say that in all three institutions I've operated in, they operate very differently. So just as there are a lot of different higher education experiences, Harvard doesn't necessarily do the same things like community college, doesn't do the same thing as HBCU. In the same way, we are talking about various experiences that we are trying to create for various learners as well. So that's how I ended up where I am, and feel very fortunate now to be able to work with colleagues like you and our other colleagues within the university system of Maryland as well.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you here in the University System of Maryland, and I really appreciate you as a partner here at Shady Grove. So thank you for making that journey here. It's terrific. I want to go back to your Six Flags experience.
Yes.
Because, I think what you said is so important, that you learn customer service, right? You learn to kind of think about what the clients or the customers' needs are and how you can work as a team to make sure that happens. And, I think in higher education, a lot of our focus is on the institution, right? A lot of our focus is on institutional processes and the accreditation of the institution. And these are all very important things. But the idea of seeing the student as a customer is something that I think we've resisted in higher education, in part because we don't want to think about higher education as a business. We want to think about it more as a learning experience and kind of preparing people for life. And all of those things are very important. But we are at a point where students are asking hard questions about the return on investment for higher education, and they are making decisions like customers about whether or not they want to engage in this. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you have applied that idea of customer service or listening to the client and building a team to serve them. UMGC is a fabulous institution. It's one of the largest universities, and it is very successful. So clearly it's an institution with its own culture and practices, but it's very focused on the individual student in a really powerful way. And so I wonder if you could talk about how you do that and how you balance the kind of perspectives of higher education that's more institutional with trying to drive that change and that work really focused on the individual needs of the student.
Yes, and we hear this term student centric a lot, and it's certainly something we've been spending a lot of time on it. And I get the as a person who's been chief academic officer, been a faculty member myself, I get the resistance to simply productizing every element of what we consider to be college. And people often, of course, immediately go to that phrase, "the customer is always right," and is that true? And even in business, that's not true. And but we sort of have heard that, and it's become ingrained in us, and that and when they get to drive all these things, there are plenty of times that I ask for things that I don't get as a customer of a smartphone, or when I go into the airport, or these various types of things. There are ways to say that's not what we do, or that's not the way that this operates, without necessarily distancing people from the experience as a whole. And so when we think about student-centric, there are really sort of two things that I say are true. One of them is, yes, I want to be able to have everyone looking in at the student in a way that says we are in this industry, and we understand that we should be focused in on what does that student need. And how do we craft that? But the other version of student centricity is really a version of empathy, which is less about us sort of zeroing in on the student than actually looking out from the student's perspective and seeing what are they trying to get done, or what are they seeing, and how do we think about those types of things. One of the examples that one of my mentors, Clayton Christensen, used to say is that, people don't really buy a hammer. What they buy is what you can do with the hammer. So it's really, can I actually hang a picture, or can I fix a thing? And if other ways come along that do that better, they don't necessarily need the hammer. So this isn't about trying to sell people a hammer. It's really trying to understand, what are you trying to get done? And how do we go about doing that in a way that really focuses on it? And higher education is often, in part because it is a very heavily regulated industry, in a lot of ways, Title IV funding and accreditation. But for a lot of people, when I get back to sort of fundamentals, I start off with, can we agree on what it means to learn? Can we start with that? I mean, if I ask that question in a group of people, and I say, so what is learning? And if we're talking about the acquisition of new skills, abilities, dispositions, and knowledge that you didn't have yesterday that you're going to have tomorrow, how does that happen? And what do we know about it? And are we designing things in such a way that that works for our students or not? Then it becomes far less about some of the common rigid pieces of courses and degrees and programs, which still have immense value. And I do not in any way wish to diminish that, but it requires us to be much more intentional about the way we build them, and what we're trying to message to students. The other question I ask a lot is, I know what we think we are selling, but do we know what the student thinks they are buying? And the two aren't the same thing. Yeah. So if we can figure those pieces out, it helps us a lot in moving that discussion forward. It doesn't mean, again, that we're ever going to get away from the need for some of the other things that higher education does well. We do need new research and new knowledge. We certainly need to be able to have different populations served well in a culture that they feel helps them to thrive on. But we also need to be able to have institutions where students who otherwise don't know that they're going to have a chance to succeed or have economic mobility have those. And this is what UMGC's done so well over the years in so many different places. And I often tell people, it's not just geographic. Yes, we have been on all 7 continents now, including 1983, 1984, we were in Antarctica. So we've done, polar caps and jungles and deserts. We were the first to go into active battle zones. Right now, we're in some 23, 24 countries around the globe, and there are various different circumstances. We are talking military members, spouses of military, high school students in some of the places around the globe. But we're also talking people who are working with Amazon here in the States, and who want other experiences, or corporations or direct-to-consumer models. And all of them have different stories and different needs. And our job is to really be able to, again, put ourselves in their shoes and look out and see what are they trying to get done, and what's the best way to help them do that.
That's a fantastic way to describe the challenges that we have ahead of us. A couple of things really stand out for me, what you just said. One is, you said, what does it mean to learn? What does that mean? And how do you recognize and acknowledge that learning has taken place, and what that is? And another aspect of what you said is, I'm pretty sure we know what it is we are putting out there. Do the students always know what they're getting and what that's all about? So there's a lot of kind of mutual education that has to happen back and forth in that. And I remember having a conversation with you, Greg, it was a number of months ago, I think we were at a University System of Maryland reception, and we were talking about the challenges that teachers are facing, especially new teachers during the pandemic.
Yes.
And that there were so many teachers who were leaving and still are leaving the profession because it was exhausting. There wasn't a lot of support. They were online. They were new to the profession. You know, they didn't have a lot of the things that they needed. And because of the strains and stress of the pandemic, teachers were leaving the profession. And you said, if only there's a way that we could capture what they actually have learned during that time, give them a chance to reflect on that, some critical thinking, and really turn it into a learning opportunity. So going back to what you said about learning.
Mm-hmm.
And you suggested, I mean, you were just thinking kind of off the top of your head, it was fantastic. You said, for example, rather than having them leave, why not give them an opportunity to participate in a seminar or a kind of conference that allows them to reflect on what's happened and what they've learned, and turn it into a critical thinking learning opportunity that could then catapult them on to other things in their profession as opposed to a reason for leaving. So that has stayed with me, Greg, a lot. And I think it's the kind of creativity you bring to the work that you're doing, because UMGC is serving soldiers and veterans and people, all over the world, and serving students online, and you have an incredibly diverse student body. And so, as you say, all different learning experiences, all different, learning possibilities. Could you talk a little bit about that? Could you talk a little bit about this, how you think about what it is to learn and how it feeds into the competency-based learning that you've championed as well? I think that this kind of idea carries into some of the programs and the institutional strengths that you've built into UMGC and have grown in UMGC.
Yeah, it's interesting because my brain works in relatively, people say I'm complex, but I think my brain works in a very simple form. I try to distill things down to really what's the question or thing we're trying to get done. And when it comes to education, historically, we have often thought about you got to buy the whole thing. Or none at all. And I can talk a little bit more about that when it comes to the music and news industry, because I think that for a long time, those were big challenges when they were disrupted that they had to work their way through. But when you're talking higher education, if you're really talking about what we do, I think that the two big things we do is we provide opportunities for people to gain skills that they didn't have before. And I'm using skills in the broadest sense: skills, abilities, knowledge, dispositions. And we also certify that they have those skills. And I mean, in its simplest form, teachers have students in a class, they will eventually assess them in some form, a test or a project or something that says they now have the skill, they can now do something that they couldn't do before. And for us, a lot of that has turned into, okay, so what do we want to functionally do? And if we're going to serve our students well, how do we make sure that we can do our best at assessment? And also, that doesn't always necessarily mean that they have to be assessed in the traditional ways that we think about it.
Right.
Nor does it mean that the only way they can gain skills are in sort of the traditional formal classroom. So when we were talking about teachers, one of the big challenges that we heard, and I can't remember the gentleman's name from Baltimore who was with us that night, but it was around, so let me get this straight. We literally have students who are as substitute teachers going into these classrooms day in and day out. They are experiencing things and they are learning in those things how to deal with things, or at least we believe they're at least navigating that space. And we say, in addition to the work you've got to do when you finish at the end of the day to grade papers and work with student planning and other pieces, you've still got to go do a rigid formal class experience for everything before we will actually, give you the stamp of approval. And my thinking on this is, we've immersed you in these experiences. There's a reasonably good chance that if we could find ways to track that and assess that, it's the same thing we see with the military a lot. I've just come back from an absolutely wonderful but long whirlwind tour of the last month of a lot of our locations around the globe as we were doing graduations. But I was sitting this was at Camp Fuji in Japan. And I was talking to a sergeant major there who was nearing the end of his degree program. And I was thinking about all of the various academies he's gone through, all of the various assessments of rank that he's had to be assessed for. And again, thinking that same thing, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to say, if you are at a certain rank, at every rank you had to be assessed by an expert, that expert had to document what you did and how well you did. And that should be worth something. That should not require you to then go back and have to repeat all of that stuff in a formal classroom setting. We're hearing the same thing. We're talking to some of our corporate partners. If we are talking with an Amazon or a Target, and we have people in their mid-level management who they're saying, we want them to be able to, work with diverse populations. Rather than have them come sit in a class on diverse populations, let's talk about what are they doing on the job? What's the evidence that we have that they're engaging in those ways? Can we have somebody who's observing them, tell us how well they're doing, and then give them credit for those things to keep moving forward? Now, these are all ways that challenge the sort of traditional formal way of learning, but are still equally valid if we can, figure out the processes by which we do those types of things. And this is what I think we want to be able to do. And you're beginning to see more and more of that. This is one of the reasons why you see more and more people doing a Coursera or a Google certificate, or even in some cases, just going online to find how to do something. I often ask my team, it's like, well, how many of us have not gone on YouTube to figure out how to do something around the house at this point? And all of these tools are out there, and we've got to figure out how to navigate that dynamic environment of learning will continue to change. Access to information will continue to change. Access to ways to, develop new skills will continue to change. Do we have an understanding of the value we bring to the table? And are we comfortable with being able to espouse that to students who are coming in and saying, I can't afford a house because I'm going to spend the equivalent of a mortgage in going to school. So being able to do that is going to be important as we continue to move forward in this conversation.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's where the innovation is, in figuring out how do we help people develop the skills and the knowledge, and how do we certify that they've done it? And that's where a lot of the innovation is coming from. That's terrific, Greg. I really appreciate that, that wonderful perspective. One of the things that UMGC has been well known for, and that I know you're continuing to develop, is data analytics, how you use data to know if you're being successful and students are successful. And it's a big part of your strategic vision is the role of data in the work that UMGC does. Talk with us a little bit about how you see the value of, or how you utilize analytics in what you're doing, both in terms of getting at that notion of our students, can we certify that students are learning, and also just for your own measures internally of how you're doing as a team, and how you're working with businesses, and your success. Talk just a little bit about the role of data analytics in the work that you're doing.
Sure. One of my greatest colleagues and mentors, the guy named Steve Hodowns. He's was my boss for a period of time as the CEO at SNHU. It's there at SNHU's College of Online and Continuing Education. And one of the things that he always used to say, is, if you aren't measuring, you're just practicing. And one of the things I take that with me, because so how do I know what success looks like, and how are we going to make sure we meet those various metrics as we continue to move forward? I have in my head, and my team is working very hard on this, a sort of vision of a Doppler radar of the student experience, and being able to forecast performance and other things, just as a large number of factors go into whether or not a meteorologist is going to tell you there's a reasonably good chance of rain tomorrow, or this is what we see happening. And then always they tell you that there's a certain percentage. When you look at your app, it's 30% chance of rain. So it's not always certain, but you see the various elements coming together in such a way that leads you to be able to say, I should probably carry an umbrella tomorrow. Or those types of things. For the student, being able to see and have a lot of data being fed in that says these types of students, when we get these types of signals, are likely to do X or Y, either good or bad. It's one of the things that I think we've got to be better at in real time. So this is not simply using data to go back and take a look at why students weren't successful last semester. This is in real time being able to see, last night this student tried to answer this formative assessment and did not get it right 4 times. And therefore, we believe that that's a signal for you to need to be able to reach out to X or Y student. And here's some of the things that a student like that has done previously and been successful that you might want to recommend. That's a whole new level of engagement with students that I think we've got to be better at, and trying to figure out how to feed that information into the right people at the right time. So a lot of our faculty members, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, they've got a couple of hours before, particularly their part-time faculty, that they're going to go into their full-time jobs. They want to know, who are the 3 students I need to actually work with right now to help them to be successful. For students who are not being successful, the same type of thing is true. If I'm not being successful, can you recommend 2 or 3 things that have been successful for other students that I might want to deploy that can help me to be successful? All of that is sort of being able to see the landscape and helping those students to be successful. The same thing is true for our various team members. How do we prepare them with the right dashboards? How do we prepare them with the information that allows them to know when should you be concerned about a student and when shouldn't you be, based upon the various factors that we are talking about? How are you feeling about the success of the class and what can we do better next time, are all other pieces that are tied to the data that we need to be very much aware of. But the real goal, again, is not to simply use data in a descriptive fashion that talks about what happened in the past, to really be able to do that in real time to change that trajectory. Because, as you know, if I wait till the students failed, then they're already in that sort of mindset of, I knew I wasn't college material, I didn't think I could do this in the first place, and now I've got to try to pull them up from a deeper hole than if I was able to, reach out to them in real time and say, hey. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about even being explicit about what learning is, because learning does include failure. And how do students adapt to the things that, and when I say failure, I don't mean failure in the sort of deficit model. I mean failure in the sense that there are going to be things by which when you don't get them right, it serves as a building block for moving forward if it's applied in the right ways. So how do we do that in ways that help students to build on that, and to also let them know there are going to be places where you stumble, but when you do, we're here. The other example I use a lot is it's like being a Sherpa with a student trying to climb the mountain. I can't climb the mountain for you, but I can be there. And if I've climbed the mountain with other students, I can tell you where you're likely to struggle up the mountain. I can keep my eye on you to see when you're going to have altitude sickness, or if you might just need to stop for a break. My job is to be there every step of the way with you and take a look at the signs and adjust accordingly. That requires real-time data and real-time observation in a way that I think many institutions are not yet equipped to do, but that we're working very hard on trying to accomplish.
So Sherpa analytics, I think, is what it is.
Yes. Everybody will get a blanket by the end of the time this is all over with.
I love it. That's really exciting. I love the Doppler radar, the Doppler radar idea. So I'm going to wrap up with a kind of broader question for you. And that is, UMGC has been a great partner with USG for many years. And there are lots of good possible things we can do together going forward. I know our teams are working hard to find some great synergies around career readiness and pathway work and things as well. So I'm very excited to see where that work goes. And a lot of that collaboration is really around where we see the direction of higher education, where we see higher education going. You've just finished a whirlwind tour around the world, visiting different bases and different campuses of students graduating from UMGC. And, you've been a Fulbright senior fellow and have spent time in Europe and elsewhere. You've been in some of the most innovative institutions across the United States. Where do you see the direction? You've talked a lot about, we've talked about the competencies, and, we need different ways to capture learning and to certify learning and to convey, to try to help students understand what they need and where they're going with that as well. But what do you see as the kind of bigger long-term picture? What does higher education look like through the eyes of President Greg Fowler as we look 10, 20 years down the road?
I continue to believe, and I'm going to, qualify what I'm saying with, there are many different roles that higher education has, as I said a little while ago. And so some of those roles, I think, may evolve at a slower pace. What we're doing with research, for example, and new knowledge and that type of work is a different element of higher education than how we engage students in experiences where they're going to gain new skills, i.e. learn. And so for that second piece, I often talk about things. I recently read a book called The Great Upheaval by Art Levine. And it was really one of those places where he echoed a lot of things that I've said about industries across the country, using things like news, music, and a couple of other areas. And what I continue to say to people is, we continue right now to do things. I'll back up for just a second and say, people ask me about inclusivity and DEIB and all those types of things. And I often point out to them that higher education is not inherently something that DEI has been a part of when we have built out these experiences. And higher education comes out of two things. It comes out of religious orders and monasteries, and also out of the guild system. Neither of those two things were interested in democratizing their experiences or having large numbers. In fact, they did a lot of work to make sure that they remained exclusive. And you see that in a lot of the ways that people talk about higher education now, and selectivity, and being able to say we only take the top 1%, and seeing that as a high value. I think that's a problem. And I think that we continue to look at that in a different way. But again, access to learning, access to information has changed. When I was doing a lot of my research, it involved archives and stacks and microfiche and microfilm, and having to get permission to check out things. And the skill set now is not so much tied to access to information. We are overloaded with information. It's harder to figure out what information has value. It's hard to figure out, more and more how to, deal with the technologies that, feed all this information to you. And that requires us to think differently about what education is. This conversation around Chat GPT, similar to the conversation around MOOCs and so many other things, is about, the learning and how we define it and what we consider the skills that we're going to need continue to evolve. And we've got to be able to do it with that. With that in mind, I go back to this idea of movies and news. And I say to people, look, more people listen to music now than probably ever have in human history. They just don't listen to it in the way that the industry 30 years ago wanted them to do so. So it's no longer I've got to buy a whole package CD. It's no longer I've got to buy a hard copy newspaper, but I can actually, create these sort of user experiences that fit my needs. And, when that first came out, the industry was really resistant to it. No. We're going to try to sue these companies that are doing this type of work. And I have said, once that genie was out, it was not going back in. We didn't know exactly how it was going to happen, but you knew that there was going to be someone who figured out the things that eventually became iTunes and Pandora and Spotify and all the things that happened afterwards, where users can have smaller chunks of a thing and put it together based upon what their needs are. So I can take 5 different songs. I can, get them now, buy them one at a time, and I can say, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go on a road trip, or I'm going to have a party, and I can pair those things in different ways based upon what I'm trying to do. That's similar to what I see happening over a period of time with learning as we continue to move forward. And you do see that happening already right now. Again, YouTube, Google, these are places where people are gaining little chunks of learning. They don't require you to actually have a credential for them. So when we're talking about jobs and workforce readiness, what I think we're going to see more and more of, and you see this in Maryland now, when the governor, Hogan, and now Governor Moore said, we're not going to require you to have a degree for a lot of these jobs, but we are going to require you to have skills. And how do we go about making sure they have those skills? How do we make sure that those skills are assessed in such a way that we can have confidence that when they get hired, they can do the job? That's part of the challenge that lies ahead. So how do we continue to iterate on those evolutions of building out learning experiences and packaging ways that allow the user to figure out what they want to do? A lot of my colleagues who are in the newspaper industry would bemoan the fact that, why are people buying my paper as I'm working so hard for it? It's like, it's not that they aren't interested in news. It's that they're getting it in different ways, and we've got to adjust. And you've seen the newspaper industry do that. The movie industry coming out of the pandemic is trying to deal with, do people go back to theaters, or do they want to watch this on HBO Max? And that's all of the types of things you're going to see happening, I suspect, in a period of time when education will continue to be valuable, but it may be accessible and packaged in ways that make some of us who've been in this for decades a little bit uncomfortable as it moves forward.
Yeah, but it's heading that direction. And this is so helpful, Greg, the way you've described it. And I think the analogies to the different industries, especially to the music industry and the newspaper industry, is a really, really helpful metaphor for understanding where we're going as well. Yeah, it's not easy, but we're grateful here at the universities at Shady Grove that we have such innovative leading partners like you and your team at UMGC to help us navigate these changes and hopefully be out in front of them in ways that serve students and the workforce and our changing economy and changing society. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much talking with you, and I'm really appreciative of you taking time to join us.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you as well for the partnership out at Shady Grove. We look forward to continuing to create brand new ways that can help even more learners be successful. So thank you for helping us with this work as we continue to move forward as well.
Thank you.